So, Nurburgring 24 is just around the corner, and for a lot of us on the service, we're going to be looking to compete in that race. Now, the Nordschleife is one of the most challenging circuits to drive, but it's also one of the most challenging circuits to actually set the car up on. So today, I figured why not make a video explaining what we're looking for in regards to a setup with a GT3 car around here, and see if we can help you guys out a little bit with some of the values. Now, some of these values are things that we're not going to change across tracks. There's some values in the setup that stay the same regardless of where you're racing at, but then of course there's going to be other parts where we want to try and just refine it a little bit and try and maximize as much as we can out of the car. But before we get started, I do want to announce that I am opening up 10 slots for our Nurburgring 24 performance package. All the details are in the graphic on screen just now. If you guys are interested in taking part in that, or you have any questions about how it's going to work, then please feel free to comment down below or contact me through Discord. So we're going to take a look at the setup now. This is a setup that I have made just before this video started, and we've done a little bit of testing with it. We're in the Aston Martin just for this video specifically, but we're going to try and keep it quite GT3 specific, not so much car specific for the Aston Martin. So in general, at the Nordschleife, the first thing we're going to be looking at is the rear wing angle. Now, this is a low downforce circuit. There's a lot of long straights that you can just lose a heck of a lot of time for no reason. So in general, you're going to be looking to run minimum wing, or at most 2 clicks up from minimum. So for the Aston Martin, 5 degrees is the minimum. I would say at most you want to run is 7. Now with that, of course, we're going to have to adjust things like the rake. So the rake will be the difference between the front ride height and the rear ride height. That is your sort of rake level. So lower wing, you want less rear ride height or less rake. Higher wing angle, you're going to want more rake or more rear ride height. So of course more rake will give you more rotation through the corners, but then down the straight you're creating a bigger aero platform, or a lot more aero resistance, so your straight line speed is going to be a little bit slower. So generally, if you're going to be running minimum wing or close to it, you're going to want to run quite a low rake angle. Now of course at the Nordschleife as well, we do have track specific ride heights for this place just because of the nature of the circuit. So normally in the sim, the front ride height minimum is 50, but of course if we try and drop this down, you can see it's at 69.8 and it's failing tech on both the splitter and the front ride height. So in general, across every single track and every single car, you want the front ride height to be as low as possible. You want it to be flashing yellow if possible, but obviously providing that the front end is symmetrical. If we do this, you know, the front splitter is flashing yellow, which is where you want it, but the cross weight is 50.1. If I try and go 1 click lower, I fail. So every car is different as well. There's some cars where the splitter will hit the limit first. There's other cars where the ride height will hit the limit first and the splitter is still a few mil off the ground. So you're going to have to take that into account when it comes to adjusting the rear ride height. But front ride height is something that stays the same at every single circuit, as is the front camber. You always want to run 4.0 front camber, maximum front camber that you can get out of it. That will never change. The other thing that doesn't change across circuits is the rear toe in. So back in the day we used to be allowed to run negative rear toe in, which was advantageous for a multitude of reasons, but it wasn't realistic. So iRacing have gradually increased the minimum allowed toe angles to the point now where it's plus 1.5 on the rear end, and no matter the car, you want to run minimum. I think in the Porsche it will be plus 3 because it's taken the two 1.5s and combining them into just one toe in value, so that's why the Porsche might look slightly different. But yeah, in general, the brake pads, you want to run low friction as well at every single track. Essentially, that it just makes it a little bit easier to modulate the brake, avoid the ABS and such like that. And then the master cylinders, you can sort of adjust these as you please. The higher you go, so the higher the number, then the more brake input you're going to have to use to get the desired stopping effect. So if you wanted to hardly use any brake to stop the car, 15.9 would be where you'd want to go. If you think, right, I want to use more brake pressure, that feels too sensitive, then you go closer up to 25.4. I wouldn't recommend going this high, but this is just the sort of range of adjustment. But for me, just with how I brake and how I like the car, 17.8 is roundabout where I like to run. Most tracks it's 19.1 as well. It's just pretty dependent. So looking at your ARBs, generally when you're adjusting the front, you want to adjust the rear as well. These two are tied. The main goal of the anti-roll bars is to adjust how the car is going to squat from side to side through the corner. So if the car feels like, if you're coming through a right hand corner and the left hand side is compressing too much and you're scraping the ground, or it's just snapping on you out of nowhere, then that could be a sign that the ARBs are too soft. So you might want to increase those just so that the car isn't squatting from left to right quite as much. It just creates, the stiffer the ARB, the more stable the aero platform you're going to have, but at lower speeds the car will be less compliant, and over some curbs it can feel a little bit strange as well. So if you're going to stiffen the ARBs, which in general you do kind of want around here, you want slightly stiffer anti-roll bars just with the high speed corners, then you're going to have to start looking at your bump rubber gaps and your dampers, but we'll get to the bump rubber gap shortly. Everything on the in-car adjustment page is completely personal preference. There's no sort of right or wrong. Every single car has different brake pressure bias. Like some cars prefer to run closer to 50, there's others that are closer to 60. You know, it's just all about sort of finding the right range for that. ABS as well is quite track specific, so there's some circuits where you want to run quite a high ABS, as other tracks where you want to run quite a low ABS and such. It's all just quite circuit specific, and it's something that you have to kind of trial and error. But moving on to the actual chassis itself then, the front spring rate, you generally want to try and find the range where the car isn't bottoming out. So for some cars you might have to stiffen the front end quite a bit round here, just with the compressions and such. But one thing to bear in mind as well is that the spring rates and the bump rubber gaps work in tandem. So if you're going to stiffen the front spring, you want to run a higher bump rubber gap so that you get a little bit more compression and it keeps it compliant over curbs. If you're going to soften the spring, the car of course is going to compress more, so then you need a smaller bump rubber gap so that the chassis or the bottom of the car isn't smashing the circuit. And this is something that we're going to get to later in the video, where I'll kind of show you guys what happens if you run the wrong bump rubber gaps, where the car compresses. As it comes back up, it will then spin, and this is where the spring rates and the bump rubber gaps are really important around here, to try and tune those accordingly. It's kind of similar with the rear spring and rear bump rubber gap. I'll show you guys a little trick that you can do to sort of speed up tuning these things without having to use telemetry. If you're not sure on how to read actual car telemetry in terms of setup stuff, then this is a sort of easier way of doing things. But yeah, the rear spring and the rear bump rubber gap, they work the same as the fronts. Every car is going to have different sort of specifications for that. There might be some cars where you do run a stiffer front spring compared to rear. It just all depends on the engine geometry and things like that, where the front weight distribution is positioned as well. This is a handy little piece of information that you can use to sort of dictate what spring rates you want to use and things like that. And generally, looking down at the gears and diff section, the gear stack, I wouldn't worry too much about that. You've got FIA or Le Mans. I'd run Le Mans, yeah, Daytona, Le Mans, tracks like that, but around here the FIA one is perfectly fine. And at the Nordschleife, traditionally you want to run slightly more diff locking than at other circuits, so that could either be running 12 friction faces on the clutch with, you know, slightly less preload, or if you want to go down on the friction faces, you want to go back up on the preload, because as you come down on the friction faces, you're taking locking out of the diff, so you're going to want to add locking back with the diff preload. So that's something that you can tune, but traditionally you want to run quite high friction faces at the Nordschleife, and then use the preload to get the desired balance primarily into lower speed corners. So the GP circuit is a good test of the differential, just because you're braking and turning quite a lot, and you need to get the car really slowed right down at some of those apexes, and then as you pick throttle up, if the rear's starting to float a little bit, then you want to come down on the preload because it's too high and you've not got the right rear grip. Or if you're spinning on entries primarily into the low speed stuff, then you might want to come up on the diff preload. So looking at the dampers then, these are a bit of a mystery to a lot of us, and I will be the first to admit I am not a damper genius by any means. It is very much a trial and error thing. You can tune them with telemetry using damper histograms and things like that. I personally am not smart enough to read them and know what to adjust and things like that, but in general, the low speed compression damping, it's just sort of does what it says on the tin. This is more to do with like weight transfer, so weight transfer from front to rear as you're braking or accelerating, and the high speed damping is more to do with curb strikes. So if you're hitting the brake and the car's spinning on entry, you might want to run slightly more damping on the low speed to try and slow down the weight transfer so that the weight isn't going all the way to the front, coming off the rear too quickly and causing it to upset. If the car's understeering on entry, then typically you can go with less damping to try and speed the weight transfer up and see if that gives you a little bit more responsiveness where you're looking for it. And the same thing for the high speed damping as well. So the compression is how the shock compresses as you hit a curb, and then the rebound is how it comes back out or comes back off again. And again, these are things that you can tune with data if you know how to read it, but if not, it's very much trial and error, and every car is different in regards to what number is max damping, what number is minimum. But yeah, if you're suffering from quite heavy curb strikes and you want to try and the car's getting upset over bumps and curbs, then you typically want to run a bit more damping. So in the Aston's case, it would be going closer to 0. Or if the car feels quite comfy over curves but just feels a little bit sort of lethargic, or it's compressing too much through some of the faster corners like Flugplatz and Moot Curve and things like that, then you might want to run a little bit less damping just so that the car isn't squatting quite as hard. So we're in the car now, and we're basically going to go for a lap and get ourselves a little bit of data just to double check the spring rates and the bump rubber gaps, and I'll show you guys kind of what we're looking for in regards to those. So this setup should feel fairly comfortable. General balance should be, yeah, pretty nice. Nice and safe. But of course at the moment we've got the cool tyres as well, so don't want to overdo it at this stage. Yeah, so far, over the bumps and everything, it feels pretty smooth. But the big areas are going to be Flugplatz and Moot Curve, just with the big compressions. It's going to be something that we're going to want to check. The first big compression coming up, this will be a good test. Of course on cold tyres we are going to have to lift a little bit. Yeah, didn't really hear any bottoming there, so that's a good start. Through here as well, this is going to be a good test of the curb handling, so we'll see where the dampers might need to go, or the bump rubbers, but so far, yeah, feels pretty nice. Can't hear any scraping. So far so good. Through this left-hander, yeah, pretty smooth. So, at that point we know that the curb handling's okay, but this is going to be the first big test, is Flugplatz. Again, a little bit of a lift as it's lap 1. Hear a little bit of a scrape there, but the general balance didn't get upset. So again, that's a good sign. And then up here as well, you can hear a little scrape just back there, so that might be something we need to look at. That could indicate that the bump rubber gap is too big. We kind of want to bring it down a little bit just so that the splitter isn't slamming the ground quite as hard. But we'll get another opportunity down here as we hit this compression. We'll hear how much the car's going to slam. This would give us a slightly better idea of where to go with the bump rubber gap. Yeah, so quite a significant scrape there. So that's telling me that the bump rubber gap might just be a little bit too big, which would make sense because the curb handling is fairly nice, which you'd expect from large rubber gaps, but of course if the car is scraping way too much, then we're going to have to try and bring them down a little bit and try and just compromise slightly. Another opportunity for the car to bottom out here. Does it bottom? Nope. Sounds pretty good. The car will bottom out here. Not too bad though, we didn't lose any rotation. Same for miss hit miss. A slight bottom there, you can see the car just lose rotation, so again, it's looking like the rubber gap is too big, or the springs are too soft. It could be one or the other. And down here another big compression. Not too bad. You see some sparks flying off the car there as well, that's normal. The splitter's always going to hit there, it's nothing we can really do about that. We didn't bottom through that corner, so that's again a good sign. But now Moot Curve is the big one. Ideally we want to be taking this flat, so we'll see how the chassis of the car is going to handle this. We'll have a small lift, I think, just because it is still lap 1, the pressures are still a bit low. Temps are a bit low, but listen out for a bump. Bit of a slam there, but general balance stayed okay. Another hit there. But these are all sort of areas that don't matter too much. To this section up here now, a lot of compressions, quite a lot of curb usage and stuff, so this will be a good test again of the suspension geometry. Yeah, it feels alright. quite a big compression there. Just lost the rotation again. Into YouTube corner. Quite a bit of understeer there. I think I overdrove the entry a little bit. Again, a little bit of scraping on that entry. Right, a pretty big compression there. So yeah, definitely going to take a look at the spring gap, or the rubber gap and the spring rates after this. Another big compression there. Same for this corner. Scraped a little bit, not too bad. Yeah, the general balance is feeling pretty nice, so we know that the rake angle is probably good. So this is the key part of the circuit that we're going to be looking at on the replay in just a second to see how close the car's sitting to the ground on the straights. And there's going to be another big bump into here as well, so we see how the curb handling is through this section. It's very bumpy. Feels pretty good. I didn't really brake hard enough there, but yeah, the car was pretty compliant. So yeah, there we go. Gained a little bit of data. Let's go and have a look. So the first section we're going to look at then is just over these curves. So what we're going to be looking for is to see sparks, and when we see the sparks, is the car losing rotation. So it's normal to see sparks through sections like this. Don't harass yourself too much about, yeah, if you see a spark, that's a bad thing, because it's not. It's more when the car sparks, is it straightening itself up, in which case it's compressing too much and then your aero balance is going to be all messed up. But yeah, through here we saw one bit of sparking, but in general the curb handling was still okay. Through this right-hander, yeah, I made a little bit of a mistake there on the cool tyres, but in general, yeah, not even seeing a little bit of sparking there as I come off the curb, but that's fine. And then into fluke plats, this is going to be the big one here. Where are the sparks coming from? Is it front or rear? A bit of a lift into the compression. So there you see the sparks, and there you can see the car sort of straightens up a little bit as it hits that. You can just see the yaw of the car change slightly. So what we're going to do, use the camera tool. I'm going to zoom it in just a little bit, bring it round, bring it down like so, and I'm going to play it through in slow motion, and you can see the sparks are coming from the left front, not the rear. So double check again. Through that compression, look at the left front there, the sparks come, none really from the rear. So the first thing we would do is go to the garage, and we see you got a 58mm rubber gap. First thing I'd do is maybe drop that 5, so hold shift, click it, go down to 53, and then try it again and see what happens, or see what it does to the curb handling. So just to confirm the theory on the front suspension, we're going to come to miss hit miss, and we're going to have a look at the sparking through this section. So it can be a little bit tricky sometimes to get the camera angle right, but here we go. Looking at the left front and the left rear. Where's the sparks coming from? Left front again. So yeah, same as fluke plats. So we know that the front bump rubber gap is too big, because the car is compressing more at the front than it is the rear, and the rear is not bottoming out. So we can go through this section now. We can skip forward. And then we're going to go up to moot curve. As we pop through the barrier, can we see? Here we go. Right, you see it's from the front again. I think there's a little one from the rear. Slow it down a little bit more. Yeah, it's the right side in general. So again, coming down on the bump rubber gap and then potentially stiffening the anti-roll bars front and rear will stop the car from squatting too much on that side. Of course, there's a little bit of damper work that you can do as well with that. But yeah, from what I can see here, it's just the whole right side is slamming. There's always going to be a scrape through here that you can't completely prevent it, but what we want to do is stop the car from compressing into the track, and then as it comes back up, the diffuser coming too far off the ground and then stalling. That's what's going to cause the spin. So we want to try and minimize how hard we're hitting the ground. There's always going to be a scrape in some of these sections. Like, there's nothing you can do. It's just about minimizing it and making it more palatable to drive. So now, looking at the last part of the lap, what we're going to do is just spin this camera around to here, drop the camera down to about 0.2. Then all we're going to do is just simply play it through in slow motion, and just watch how the car is interacting with the circuit. So how close we are to the ground, have we got positive rake on the straights, have we got negative rake on the straights. Of course you want negative rake on the straight but then positive rake in the corners, and that again is all going to come from your spring rate and your bump rubber gaps. But looking at this, the front is sitting fairly low to the ground. You don't really want to be slamming down the long straights, as you know that kind of resistance will slow the car down slightly. So I mean, in general I'm pretty happy with how this is looking in terms of the gap between the bottom of the car and the circuit. The rake looks pretty flat in general, maybe slightly positive rake, which would be expected again with a stiffer rear spring than at the front, so the rear isn't going to be allowed to compress quite as much. But no, I mean in general this is pretty fine. The main sort of differences that we're going to be looking for is just in the playing around with the front spring, maybe stiffening it one click, or as I showed you guys before, just simply bringing down this front bump rubber gap by about 5mm at a time until the car stops compressing majorly in these key corners. Now we don't want to stop the bottoming entirely, you know, through some of these big compressions in the straighter sections. There's no need to try and stop that. It's going to happen just with the nature of the circuit. It's more stopping the hard slamming that is going to upset the balance of the car through the higher speed corners like Flugplatz, Moot Curve and Plantsgarten and things like that. Those are the main areas of concern, that if the car's slamming as the car's rotating when it slams, if it straightens up, then that's what's going to lead to a crash. Or if the rear is compressing too much as it comes back up, the diffuser stalls and then you spin. So we're just looking to try and build something that is predictable and comfy, and yeah, you can do that through looking at your bump rubber gaps. But if the general rule of thumb as well is if the balance feels good, then the rake is probably fine. You know, you don't really want to run a huge amount of rake around this circuit anyway, in most cars, because you're running such a low rear wing angle. So you do want to run quite a low rear ride height. But yeah, you can sort of adjust it. If it feels a little bit too understeery, just go up like 1mm at a time on the rear to sort of play around with it and get the balance that you really feel that you want. And that is how we look at a GT3 setup. Hopefully this has been useful to you guys. Again, if you are interested in getting a bit of further help with anything, then you can contact me on Discord for coaching. The pricing list and everything is in my Discord, and you can comment down below or send me a message on Discord. And of course, remember, we've got the Nurburgring 24 performance package as well. If you guys are interested in getting a fully bespoke setup, qualifying, race and wet, then you can apply for that. Again, only 10 slots available. You get 3 hours of coaching included in it, plus a bunch of other benefits as well. So yeah, thank you so much for watching, guys. We'll see you next week, and have a good one.